And welcome back to our panel discussion, Data-Centric Approaches to Government in the Cloud, sponsored by Avnet Government Solutions and NetApp here on Federal News Radio 1500 AM and federalnewsradio.com. Our guests today are Darren House, the Chief Technology Officer at Microtech and former Director of Technology Solutions at Avnet Government Solutions. Stephen Hernandez is the Chief Information Security Officer in the Office of Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Harry Lee is the Deputy Chief Information Officer for the Census Bureau, Walter Harris, the Chief Operating Officer for the FDA, and Raj Rana, the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Partner Ecosystems at NetApp. And before the break, we were talking about this idea of the gravity and largeness and continuing growth of data. Petabytes, exabytes, I don't know what comes beyond that, but petabytes, maybe many, many bytes, versus applications which don't grow in that manner. And so you've got this mismatch in portability and ease of moving around between cloud and local. And Stephen, what are your thoughts on that, and what are some ways of handling that so that you get the agility and scalability and so on needed by clouds?
Sure. So data gravity is such a fun topic because, it brings to mind these big planets and, mass and density, and wow, look at all the gravity and the things that pull towards it, right?
So we should put data centers in space. Where nothing
right,
has any weight.
Exactly. Yeah, we should put them in space, put them in orbit. But data is no different. As it grows, as it becomes more complex, as it becomes more dense and the mass increases, applications and people are drawn to it. Mission is drawn to it because it can provide so much value to the organization in ways it couldn't before. What this means, though, is, it's most valuable when it's all together, and that's when it has the most gravity. Yet, for example, in my office, we have almost 100 locations across the nation from Hawaii to Puerto Rico. And so how do I have this huge glob of data that's so rich and valuable, and yet the person in Hawaii has the same accessibility and the same performance as the person in Puerto Rico or Washington, D.C.? And so a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is just organizational change management. You really have to be on top of who your users are, what data they really need to get their hands on, and then where are they at physically or even logically from a technological perspective? Because if we're opening an office down in rural Louisiana, they may not have the best network connectivity. They may not have the best accessibility to resources and technology that, say, someone in Kansas City or Washington, D.C. does. And that then begs the question, well, do I need to start caching a subset or some of that data in that location? And do I need to have some way to keep that fresh for them? And so as your organization changes and as it grows or it shrinks, or you're bringing in new mission or you're dropping mission or opening new locations, you have to ask the question, and it's a cross-cutting question: what data do they need and how are they going to use it?
Is that the thinking that is informing what FDA is doing with its plan too?
Absolutely. In line with Stephen's comments, so mobility for us means having people to be able to work anywhere, no matter where they are, have access to data no matter where they are. I think given how long it takes to get data to and from a cloud service provider, we're kind of the opinion that you should send it to the cloud and leave it there. That becomes expensive over time, I know, so we got to figure out the whole storage issue, but you can have cloud-based storage servers that just, it's like a satellite. You send it there and leave it there. But then you have to decide how to educate the folks inside the organization of how to operate around this type of model. And that's where the culture shift comes in. I think we're doing some pretty good moves as it relates to organizational changes. The one thing that I think we've done that's quite well and successfully is we've now recruited a top-notch CIO, Mr. Todd Simpson. He's now going to be taking this boulder and turn it into a bunch of pebbles for us at FTA, so we welcome him on board. But I do believe that part of the strategy is managing it through a way where you don't have to have the back and forth of data. Put it in the cloud, and keep it there, and find ways to manage the storage costs.
Yeah, only on Federal News Radio do you find a discussion of data devolving into orbital physics and thermodynamics and all of that kind of thing, which this is what we like here. And so, yeah, Raj, this whole issue of organizational change does map over to the agility, and which makes me think of the plans people mentioned. Walter mentioned his plan, Harry, and the plans that they are creating for this new environment.
Sure.
But a plan somehow has the implication of fixed and done and ready like a blueprint. But just as you need agility and scalability in the cloud and in the hybrid environment, don't you also need plans that are equally flexible?
100%. And I think the challenge with the plans are that they change. And so your infrastructure needs to be able to respond to that, whether it's changes in technology, changes in policy, changes in we'll call it world events, regardless of what situation is, that you don't always have the luxury of once a plan is defined of being able to follow it to the end. And so I think that it's really incumbent upon the vendors, the industry, if you will, to be able to provide tools and resources that make it easy for people to be able to for agencies to be able to shift around as things are necessary. There are a couple of comments I wanted to address. I mean, one of the things about data gravity, 100% agree. And I think that as you start to add more and more data, it becomes difficult to move it. And so having that's really the premise of this whole concept of the data fabric, is to be able to move that around, because you are going to have situations where I know I have the data here, but I need it over in another location. Similar type things, right, to what we're doing in with Department of Defense, right? You have challenges, obviously, with rural locations in CONUS, but there's other, when you're deployed, there's similar challenges you have, and you may not have any internet connection, or you may not have any of that, but you still need to be able to be part of that overall fabric. And when time comes back and you do have the internet connection or the network connectivity, to be able to connect back and add, if you will, add your pebble back to the boulder, because that's valuable data, and that's data that needs to be captured, needs to be provided back. And frankly, with all of this, the challenge is that Darren made a comment earlier about Google rewriting the TCP/IP stack. It's not only just the money. No one has the time to be able to do that. Right, so let's just say somehow the budget problems got resolved, right, and everyone had money to rewrite, networking protocols. People don't have the time to be able to do that. So back to the previous comment of saying, look, I have an expectation that's currently been set. That the IT organization has set an expectation based off of their on-premise environment. I want that same expectation. I want to move that out. So being able to take certain components of that, right, from our perspective, the storage component of that, and saying we're still going to be able to provide you with the same consistent latency, the same consistent performance, and as well as a flexibility depending on your applications to be able to ramp up, ramp down. Only thing that changes is the ephemeral transactions that exist in, say, the public cloud. So being able to switch those things around and having that allows agencies to move more quickly to the cloud, still managing all of those challenges that they had identified before, but also protecting and addressing those challenges.
From a business perspective as well, your discussion about the vendors and how they're posturing to make this work, it's fascinating that the smart ones have already recognized that the data gravity issue is huge. Several of the leaders will allow you to transmit in as much data as you want for absolutely free. When it comes time to pull it out, that's when they start to charge you. And so when you're doing your plans and you're thinking about where am I putting my data, you need to ask yourself, what is that transaction cost to start pulling the data back out? And in some cases, it may make sense to say, I have a high transactional data set where I'm going to be pulling all the time. It may make sense to look at different solutions and consider which one might be best.
Yeah, so Darren, how flexible are data centers and cloud providers on that whole front, and in general, to be able to respond to the differing requirements of different agencies? I mean, you don't want a Roach Motel model where your data checks in and it never comes out again.
Well, that depends on who you are. Some do want that model.
They may want
and some
that model.
do have that model. And so not all cloud service providers are the same. Some do have that model. And there's a lot of agencies that didn't realize that. And when they decided to try and pull data back in, they had a big surprise. And it wasn't very happy. But it works. I think for NASA, it works. They use a cloud service provider for a lot of the space images, and they don't have any expectation they're going to be pulling that data down. It's going to stay there, and it's a good workable model for them for what they're looking for. So it depends on the model. You can go to different cloud service providers that have different terms and conditions for the data, and it all just depends on what your need is and that value. Back to the gravity thing, you're either going to have your data in a centralized environment or you're going to have it in a distributed environment. And those are pretty much the only two options we have today. And there's trade-offs for everything. So really what you need to do is just you need to think through what those trade-offs are, what the costs are for those trade-offs, and what that value is you're getting from it, and then make the decisions, right? So and then there's tools and techniques that you can use regardless of the model, whether it's WAN optimization, whether it's NetApp's tools to be able to provide storage controllers in the cloud so you can have consistency of your standard data formats and your management and your reporting and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of tools out there, so it's just a matter of picking the right tool out of the toolbox and start hammering away.
Yeah, that strikes me. There's another question here, too, and it relates kind of what to Raj said earlier about the data fabric approach, and that is there's a time quality that goes with data. We have some data that's archival. I know in the case of census, for example, 70 years later, certain data is released, and so we had hierarchical storage systems in a data center, and some things may never need to be accessed again, but because it's the federal government, you send it over to archives and it's there forever. So how does the time factor, the time value of data overlay all of the thinking we've talked about today? Harry, why don't we start with you?
Well, first of all, I got to jump in on the gravity thing. All our data
that question has gravity.
All our data gravitates to our consolidated data center right now, and so we're looking at the best way of how to distribute data, either from a collection perspective or from a distribution perspective. So we're still trying to figure that out. What we're also trying to do, though, is we've worked real hard at consolidating so that we can eventually leverage cloud. How do you discover data? How do you query and search data? How do you best manage data? So that's where a lot of our efforts are right now at the Census Bureau. From a backup and restore, we've been able to consolidate and standardize all that. What data needs to be real-time, near real-time, online, offline. So we have a strategy about that, but we have SLAs with our customers. If I need to get data, how quickly can I get it back? So again, a lot of effort into how we manage data, but it really comes down to the user requirements and user expectations.
So the answer to when can I get my data back should not be how much you got.
Right. What'll it cost?
So Walter, maybe you could walk through us that time question. Let's say a medical device, for example, that it's currently under testing and evaluation, and it moves to approval and sale. At some point, it becomes something that's a commodity. Maybe years down the line.
That's right, and I want to take you a different way if I could. So
sure.
We have products, as you allude to, have been approved and on the market, been out there for 10, 15 years.
And sometimes they come back to haunt.
That's where I'm going. So we have to keep that information for years on years, and it goes beyond 70, 90, 100 years. In some cases, we can't get rid of any of it. So the idea of trying to figure out how we manage the active data that we use every single day, and that archive data that has to be there forever, is where our challenges are. And we're still trying to figure out how to do that. But we have, you said it, we have cases where now electronic information is considered way more valuable than this sheet of paper. And so we have to keep that for years on end, because you never know when 75, 100 years from now, a case comes up. FDA has to go from the beginning of time to figure out all this, and pulling that data out is going to be the key. So that's part of my comment earlier in gravity was about, some of this data, we don't use it and haven't seen it, since I was a child, which was just yesterday. But we do know that at some point in time, we may have to pull it. And how do we get to it, and how fast will the CSP respond to us when we need it? And I think those are the strategies we have to work out at FDA.
And so can that be managed by the type of cloud? I mean, are there various types of clouds more suited to this or that kind of instant online access versus archival? Or is that just part of the SLA?
And I'm going to look at more of the technology rather than the vendor per se, right? I think it's really based off of those. And there are technologies that are currently in place that exist for a longer-term archive, for things like this, where really all you need to do is make sure that it exists and that at some point in time you can get it. Cloud vendors provide that. Hardware vendors provide that. This technology exists out there, but the question is, how do you ensure that it's still available and integrated into your fabric? If you're creating yet another silo of this information, well, the challenge that exists is to say that, I know it's out there somewhere. It's all you've done is you've created an electronic version of a filing cabinet that exists someplace else, and if that one person who knew where this was ends up retiring or leaving or didn't show up to work that day, how do you get that information? So it's taking these technologies that exist to take based off of the type of data, right? There was real-time data, but then there's archive data, and then there's long-term archive data, which really is being captured for I'll call it for regulatory purposes. That information needs to be there, and it needs to come back when I ask for it, but I have no idea when that's going to happen. So that needs to be stored as cheaply as possible because it's just going to grow. And so all of these technologies we have, so these are all become part of the overall solution that gets created based off of the needs of the customer.
All right, so how does that translate to the company in the sense of knowing that the continuity will be there corporately as well as technologically over time, because we know all the stories. You know, it's getting harder and harder to read 8-track tapes and so on. But that's a real phenomenon for data structures as well as the technologies for reading them. Darren, thoughts?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the truth is today, data is the lifeblood of an organization. All right, so it has to be protected. It has to be understood. And imagine, us as individuals, imagine if you called your financial advisor and you said, hey, I want to check out my portfolio. Where is it? He says, I don't know. It's out there somewhere, but my bill's still getting paid, so I'm sure everything's fine. The money's there. I don't know where it is, but I'm sure it's fine because the bill's still getting paid. Are you going to accept that? You're not. You need to understand what's happening with it. Data is a lifeblood. You have to understand what's happening with it. And I think to Raj's point, there are vendors out there that have created technologies that you can extend the data management capabilities from the enterprise into the cloud, so you can have the agility, you can have the elasticity of the cloud, but you can still have the management and reporting and data tiering capabilities within that environment, so you can manage it and control it and keep those standards in place. And I think that's the critical point.
All right, so Stephen, final word in 15 seconds. Is all of this data protection and management possible and doable and optimistic in the cloud?
It is. We just have a ginormous tool set. We have lots of new and exciting options. And the real key comes to understanding your organization, understanding the mission, and how we can align this tool set.
All right, good place to end this conversation. I want to thank today's guest, Stephen Hernandez, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Office of Inspector General at Health and Human Services. Harry Lee is the Deputy CIO at the Census Bureau. Walter Harris is the Chief Operating Officer of the FDA. Raj Rana, the Senior Systems Engineering Manager for Partner Ecosystems at NetApp. And Darren House, the Chief Technology Officer at Microtech, former Director of Technology Solutions at Avnet Government Solutions. I'm Tom Temin, Federal News Radio, 1500 AM.
On behalf of NetApp and Avnet Government Solutions, thank you for joining our discussion. We'll have the archive from this session available shortly, and a link will be sent to you to share with your colleagues. Those of you who requested a training certificate will receive an email with download instructions immediately following the webinar. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you.